The notification sound from my phone cut through the silence of Emma's empty bedroom like a knife. I'd been sitting there for hours, holding her favorite stuffed elephant, trying to make sense of a world that no longer included my 7-year-old daughter's laughter echoing through our house on Maple Street. When I glanced at the screen, expecting another sympathy message from our church community, I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a cheerful pink and gold invitation posted in our family group chat by my sister Rachel. Join us for Rachel's baby shower celebration, Saturday, November 18th, 2 p.m. at the Garden Club at SouthPark. Can't wait to celebrate new life with all our loved ones. The date stared back at me like a cruel joke. November 18th. The exact same day, the exact same time I had scheduled Emma's funeral service at Serenity Memorial Chapel. The phone slipped from my trembling hands as the reality hit me. My younger sister had deliberately moved her baby shower to coincide with my daughter's funeral. The funeral that had been planned for 6 months, ever since we received Emma's terminal leukemia diagnosis. The funeral that every single family member knew about because I had personally called each one when we lost our little girl 5 days ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until 5 days ago, I thought, I understood the boundaries of human cruelty. I'm 32 years old, an event planning coordinator at Grand Plaza Hotel and Conference Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've spent the last 8 years orchestrating perfect moments for other people. Weddings where nervous brides become radiant wives, corporate galas that seal million-dollar deals, anniversary parties that celebrate decades of love. My job is to anticipate every detail, manage every timeline, and ensure that nothing goes wrong on someone's most important day. I pride myself on being the person others turn to when everything needs to go perfectly. My digital calendar is color-coded by event type. My vendor contact list includes backups for every possible service, and my reputation in Charlotte's event planning industry is built on one simple principle. I make the impossible happen, and I never let my clients down. When Charlotte Magazine featured the top event planners in the city last year, they called me the miracle worker who turns chaos into perfection. But none of that professional expertise prepared me for watching my daughter fight a battle she couldn't win. Emma was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 3 months after her 7th birthday. One day she was my energetic little girl who insisted on wearing her rainbow tutus to grocery stores and practiced cartwheels in our backyard until David had to carry her inside for dinner. The next day, she was too tired to get out of bed, her skin pale as winter clouds, her appetite gone along with her constant chatter about everything she'd learned in 2nd grade. The doctors at Carolina Medical Center explained the treatment protocol with clinical precision, but they couldn't explain why this was happening to our Emma. Chemotherapy rounds that left her weak and nauseous. Hospital stays that stretched for weeks while David and I took turns sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside her bed. Insurance battles that consumed hours I wanted to spend reading her favorite books or watching Disney movies together. Through it all, Emma faced each day with a courage that humbled me. She named her IV pole Freddie and insisted on decorating it with stickers. She made friendship bracelets for her favorite nurses and asked me to bring extra snacks for the other kids in the pediatric ward. When her hair began falling out in clumps, she convinced me to shave my head too, so we could be bald buddies together. My sister Rachel's reaction to Emma's diagnosis had been typically self-centered, though I'd tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. When I called to tell her about the leukemia, her first response wasn't to ask about Emma's prognosis or offer support. Instead, she immediately launched into complaints about how the timing was terrible because she and her husband Brad were trying to get pregnant, and all this family stress might affect her fertility. "This is just such bad timing, Sarah," she'd said during that phone call, her voice carrying the same whiny tone she'd used since childhood when things didn't go according to her plans. Brad and I have been trying for 6 months, and my doctor says stress can really impact conception. Maybe you shouldn't share too many details about Emma's treatment with Mom and Dad. You know how they worry, and I don't need that negative energy right now." I'd been too shocked by her selfishness to respond appropriately. Instead, I'd mumbled something about understanding and hung up, then spent the next hour crying in my car in the hospital parking lot, while David stayed with Emma during her chemotherapy session. That conversation should have been my first warning about what Rachel was capable of, but I was too consumed with Emma's care to pay attention to my sister's escalating self-absorption. When Rachel announced her pregnancy 4 months later with the elaborate social media campaign featuring professional photos and custom hashtags, I managed a sincere congratulations despite the timing. When she complained that Mom and Dad were too distracted by Emma's condition to properly celebrate her first trimester, I encouraged our parents to make more effort to acknowledge Rachel's news. I've always been the peacekeeper in our family, the older sister who smoothed over conflicts and made excuses for Rachel's behavior. Our parents, Linda and Robert Mitchell, have always treated Rachel as the baby who needed extra attention and understanding. Even as adults, they consistently overlooked her selfishness and expected me to accommodate her demands for the sake of family harmony. This pattern had been established since childhood. When Rachel broke my favorite doll and blamed our neighbor's dog, our parents bought her a new toy to make her feel better about the misunderstanding. When she failed to turn in a major school project and claimed I'd hidden her materials, I was the one who got lectured about being more supportive of my younger sister. When she borrowed $300 from my college savings account to buy homecoming dress accessories and never paid it back, our parents suggested I consider it an early graduation gift to avoid family drama. As we grew older, the pattern continued. Rachel's wedding planning consumed family conversations for 8 months, while my own wedding to David had been treated as a simple family gathering that didn't require much discussion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I received a promotion to senior event coordinator, Rachel announced her engagement the same weekend to ensure she remained the center of attention. When David and I bought our house in Pineville, Rachel immediately began house hunting in the more expensive SouthPark area to make sure her home would be more impressive. Through Emma's illness, this dynamic had reached new levels of toxicity. Rachel's pregnancy announcements consistently coincided with Emma's medical milestones. When Emma finished her first round of chemotherapy, Rachel posted elaborate maternity photos. When Emma was finally strong enough to return to school part-time, Rachel threw herself a gender reveal party that dominated family conversations for weeks. When Emma's condition began deteriorating and we started discussing end-of-life care, Rachel demanded that family gatherings focus on baby preparations instead of depressing medical updates. The final months of Emma's life were simultaneously the most precious and most painful period I'd ever experienced. Despite her physical decline, my daughter remained determined to live fully in whatever time she had left. She insisted on attending her best friend's birthday party, even though she needed to rest every 30 minutes. She convinced David to help her plant a small garden behind our house, choosing flowers that would bloom after she was gone. She spent hours working on a scrapbook of memories for us, including photos from every hospital stay and notes about things she wanted us to remember. During those final weeks, Emma often asked about death with the matter-of-fact curiosity that characterized all her questions about the world. She wanted to know if heaven had libraries and if she'd be able to watch over us like guardian angels did in movies. She made me promise to take care of her stuffed elephant collection and to make sure her second-grade teacher knew how grateful she was for the extra reading time during her treatment. The end came faster than the doctors had predicted. Emma's condition deteriorated rapidly over a weekend, and we had barely enough time to gather close family before she slipped away peacefully on a Tuesday morning, holding David's hand while I sang her favorite lullaby. Planning Emma's funeral became my way of channeling overwhelming grief into purposeful action. I approached it with the same meticulous attention to detail I brought to my most important professional events, because this would be the last time I could do something perfect for my daughter. Every element needed to honor her joyful spirit, while providing meaningful closure for everyone who loved her. I spent hours selecting readings that reflected Emma's curiosity and kindness. I coordinated with her school to include artwork created by her classmates. I arranged for her favorite flowers, sunflowers, and daisies to fill the chapel with the bright colors she'd always preferred over pastels. I worked with our church's music director to include the songs Emma had requested, including You Are, My Sunshine, which she'd insisted I sing to her every night during hospital stays. The guest list included everyone who had been part of Emma's short but impactful life. Her teachers from elementary school, nurses from the pediatric ward who had become like family, neighbors who had brought meals during treatment, church members who had organized prayer chains and fundraising efforts. The service was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Serenity Memorial Chapel, with a reception afterward at our church fellowship hall, where Emma had attended Sunday school since she was 3 years old. I had personally called every family member to inform them of the arrangements. My parents were devastated but supportive, offering to help with any details I needed assistance managing. My aunts and uncles from both sides of the family confirmed their attendance and asked if they could contribute flowers or food for the reception. Cousins who lived across the country made travel arrangements to be present for Emma's farewell. Rachel's response to my call about funeral arrangements had been characteristically focused on herself. Instead of offering condolences or asking how she could help, she'd immediately begun complaining about the timing conflicts with her baby shower planning. "I can't believe you scheduled this for Saturday afternoon," she'd said, her voice sharp with irritation. "Don't you remember that's when I was planning my baby shower? I've already put deposits down on the venue and caterer. This is going to completely mess up my guest list because everyone will feel obligated to attend Emma's funeral instead of celebrating my pregnancy." I'd been too stunned by her selfishness to respond immediately. Finally, I'd managed to say, "Rachel, Emma is your niece. Her funeral isn't a scheduling conflict with your party. It's a family obligation and an opportunity to honor her memory. Look, I'm sorry Emma is gone, but life has to continue," Rachel had replied with the callous dismissiveness that had characterized her attitude throughout Emma's illness. "My baby shower is about celebrating new life and hope for the future. People need positive events right now, not more sadness and grief. Maybe you should consider postponing the funeral until after my shower so people aren't emotionally drained." The conversation had ended when I hung up on her, too angry and heartbroken to continue listening to her reduce my daughter's death to a minor inconvenience in her party planning schedule. I'd assumed she would recognize the inappropriateness of her comments and adjust her expectations accordingly. I'd never imagined she would deliberately schedule her celebration to directly conflict with Emma's funeral. Now, staring at the cheerful invitation on my phone screen, I realized I had fundamentally underestimated my sister's capacity for cruelty. This wasn't thoughtless scheduling or poor judgment. This was a calculated decision to force our family and friends to choose between mourning my daughter and celebrating her pregnancy. The invitation's timing was particularly manipulative. Posted in our family group chat just days after Emma's death, when everyone was focused on funeral preparations and supporting David and me through our grief. Rachel had waited until she knew people would feel uncomfortable questioning her plans, using social pressure and family dynamics to avoid direct confrontation about her decision. The venue choice added another layer of calculated competition. The Garden Club at SouthPark was an upscale event space that would require significant advance booking and deposits. Rachel couldn't have secured this location on short notice, which meant she'd been planning this conflict for weeks or possibly months. She'd deliberately chosen a more expensive, more impressive venue than our simple chapel service, ensuring her event would seem more elaborate and worthy of attention. The guest list overlap would be almost complete. Our extended family, church community, and shared social circles would all receive invitations to both events. People who had watched Emma grow up, who had supported us through her illness, who had been planning to attend her funeral to offer comfort and closure, would now be forced to make an impossible choice. Some would undoubtedly choose Rachel's baby shower, either because they preferred celebration over mourning or because they felt pressured by family expectations to support the living over honoring the dead. Others would attend Emma's funeral but might feel guilty about missing Rachel's pregnancy milestone. A few might attempt to attend both events, rushing between a child's funeral and a baby shower in a grotesque parody of life's emotional complexity. The most devastating aspect of Rachel's decision was how it would diminish Emma's final farewell. Instead of being a focused community gathering to honor my daughter's memory, the funeral would become one option among competing social obligations. People would be distracted, torn between events, checking phones for updates from the other gathering. The sacred space I'd tried to create for Emma's memory would be contaminated by the knowledge that half our family had chosen a party over paying respects to a 7-year-old who'd fought cancer with more grace than most adults show in everyday challenges. David found me still sitting in Emma's room, staring at the invitation with tears streaming down my face. My husband had aged visibly during Emma's illness, his dark hair now streaked with premature gray, his teacher's patience tested by months of medical appointments and insurance battles. He'd taken leave from his high school history classes to be present for Emma's final weeks, and his grief was as profound as mine, though he expressed it through protective silence rather than tears. "Sarah, what's wrong?" he asked, settling beside me on Emma's bed with the careful gentleness he'd learned during her illness. "Did something happen with the funeral arrangements?" I handed him my phone without speaking, watching his expression change from concern to disbelief to anger as he read Rachel's invitation. David had never been particularly close with my sister, but he'd always maintained polite family relationships, for my sake. Rachel's behavior during Emma's illness had strained his tolerance, but he'd kept his opinions private to avoid adding stress to our already overwhelming situation. "She scheduled her baby shower for the same day as Emma's funeral," he said, his voice flat with shock. "The exact same time." "She called me last week complaining about the timing," I managed to say through tears. "She said it was inconvenient that Emma's funeral was interfering with her party planning. I thought she was just being thoughtless. But this is deliberate. She's making people choose between honoring Emma and celebrating her pregnancy." David's hands clenched into fists, a rare display of anger from my usually calm husband. "This isn't thoughtlessness, Sarah. This is cruelty. She's using Emma's death as an opportunity to make herself the center of attention." His assessment was accurate, but didn't address the immediate crisis we faced. In less than 48 hours, our family and community would be forced to navigate an impossible situation created by Rachel's selfishness. Emma's funeral, which should have been a peaceful tribute to our daughter's life, would instead become a source of division and conflict. The professional part of my mind, trained to solve complex event coordination problems, began analyzing the situation systematically. Rachel's decision created multiple layers of complications that extended far beyond simple scheduling conflicts. Family dynamics, social expectations, financial commitments, and emotional manipulation all intersected to create a crisis that required strategic thinking rather than purely emotional response. My phone buzzed with incoming messages as family members began responding to Rachel's invitation. The first few were from cousins who lived out of state, asking confused questions about the timing. "Isn't Emma's funeral on Saturday?" wrote my cousin Jennifer from Virginia. "I'm so confused about these dates. Should I change my travel plans?" Then came messages from local family members who understood the implications immediately. My aunt, Carol, Mom's sister, sent a private message. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I can't believe Rachel would do this. Of course we'll be at Emma's funeral. Please let me know if there's anything you need." But other responses revealed the success of Rachel's manipulation. My Uncle Mark posted in the group chat, "Congratulations, Rachel. Looking forward to celebrating with you on Saturday," with no mention of Emma's funeral or acknowledgement of the conflict. Several family friends liked Rachel's post and added cheerful comments about baby preparations, either unaware of the scheduling conflict or choosing to ignore it. The pattern that emerged confirmed my worst fears. Rachel's strategy was working exactly as she'd planned. By posting her invitation in the family group chat, she'd created social pressure for people to respond positively and publicly. Anyone who questioned the timing would appear unsupportive of her pregnancy, while those who ignored her announcement would seem rude and uncaring. Meanwhile, Emma's funeral arrangements had been communicated through individual phone calls, focused on grief and loss rather than celebration and social media. People felt comfortable privately expressing sympathy and promising attendance, but they hadn't made public commitments that would be difficult to break without appearing inconsistent. The asymmetry was deliberate and devastating. Rachel had turned my daughter's death into a competition she was determined to win. David and I spent the evening fielding phone calls from confused family members and friends who were trying to understand the situation without taking sides or causing additional family drama. Each conversation required careful navigation between honoring Emma's memory and avoiding direct criticism of Rachel's behavior that might escalate tensions before the funeral. My parents called around 9 o'clock, their voices strained with exhaustion and confusion. "Sarah, honey, we just saw Rachel's invitation," Mom said, her words careful and measured. "We don't understand why she scheduled her shower for the same day as Emma's service. There must be some mistake or miscommunication." "There's no mistake, Mom," I replied, too tired to protect Rachel from the consequences of her own actions. She knew exactly when Emma's funeral was scheduled. She's deliberately creating this conflict. "That can't be right," Dad interjected, his voice carrying the same protective denial he'd used to excuse Rachel's behavior throughout our childhood. "Rachel would never do something that hurtful intentionally. She's probably just overwhelmed with pregnancy hormones and didn't think it through properly." The familiar pattern of minimizing Rachel's cruelty while expecting me to absorb the damage was particularly painful during this moment of profound grief. Even now, with my daughter's funeral being sabotaged by my sister's selfishness, our parents were more concerned with protecting Rachel's reputation than supporting me through the crisis she'd created. She called me after I gave her the funeral. "Details," I said, my voice harder than I'd ever used with my parents. She complained that Emma's funeral was interfering with her baby shower planning. She knew exactly what she was doing when she moved her event to conflict with Emma's service. The silence that followed confirmed their understanding of the situation, even if they weren't ready to acknowledge Rachel's culpability directly. Finally, Mom spoke again, her voice small and defeated. "What do you want us to do, Sarah? We can't be in two places at once." The question hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in my adult life, my parents were being forced to choose between their daughters instead of expecting me to accommodate Rachel's demands. The choice should have been obvious. A child's funeral takes precedence over a baby shower. But their hesitation revealed how thoroughly Rachel's manipulation had succeeded. "I want you to honor your granddaughter's memory," I said quietly. "Emma loved you both so much. She made me promise to tell you how grateful she was for all the bedtime stories you read to her during hospital stays and all the art supplies you brought to help her through chemotherapy. She spent her last weeks working on thank you cards for everyone who supported her, including special drawings just for you." The tears in Mom's voice were audible when she finally responded. "Of course we'll be at Emma's funeral, sweetheart. She was the light of our lives. Nothing is more important than saying goodbye to our granddaughter properly." Dad's agreement was immediate and firm. "We'll handle Rachel separately. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about doing what's right and honoring Emma's memory, the way she deserves." Their support provided some comfort, but it didn't address the larger crisis Rachel had created. By morning, the family group chat had filled with responses to her baby shower invitation that revealed the deep divisions her manipulation had caused. Some family members enthusiastically confirmed attendance at her celebration, while completely ignoring Emma's funeral. Others privately messaged me with apologies and explanations for their difficult positions. The most hurtful responses came from people who tried to minimize the conflict by suggesting they were equally important family events that unfortunately coincided. These well-meaning relatives failed to understand that treating a child's funeral as equivalent to a baby shower was itself a form of disrespect to Emma's memory and our family's grief. As Saturday morning approached, I realized that Rachel's cruelty had accomplished something I hadn't expected. Her calculated manipulation had revealed the true character of every person in our extended family and social circle. People who genuinely cared about Emma and respected our family would attend her funeral, regardless of competing social obligations. Those who prioritized celebration over compassion, convenience over commitment, would reveal themselves through their choices. In trying to sabotage Emma's funeral, Rachel had inadvertently created a test of authentic relationships and genuine values. The results would be painful but ultimately clarifying, showing me exactly who deserved continued space in my life and who had revealed themselves unworthy of my trust and consideration moving forward. My daughter deserved better than a funeral overshadowed by petty competition and family drama. She deserved to be honored by people who had genuinely loved her, mourned her loss, and wanted to celebrate the joy she'd brought to the world during her brief but meaningful life. Rachel's baby shower could proceed with whoever chose to prioritize her celebration over a child's farewell. Emma's funeral would be attended by people who understood the sacred nature of grief and the importance of community support during life's most difficult transitions. The difference between those two gatherings would tell me everything I needed to know about the people in my life and the relationships worth preserving as I navigated the long journey of healing ahead. The morning of Emma's funeral arrived with unseasonably warm November sunshine streaming through our bedroom curtains. I'd been awake since 4 a.m, my mind cycling through final preparations while David slept fitfully beside me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was preparing for the most important event of my professional life, one where my expertise in coordinating perfect occasions would be applied to saying goodbye to my own child. By 6 o'clock, I was dressed. In the navy blue suit Emma had helped me choose months earlier during one of her better days. She'd insisted on navy instead of black because she wanted her funeral to include her favorite colors rather than traditional mourning attire. The memory of that conversation, her small hands smoothing the fabric while she explained her reasoning with 7-year-old logic, nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. David was moving through his morning routine with mechanical precision, his grief manifesting in an almost robotic adherence to normal activities. He'd laid out his dark gray suit, the one he'd worn to his father's funeral 3 years earlier, and was methodically organizing his wallet and keys with the same attention to detail he applied to preparing lesson plans for his high school students. Neither of us mentioned Rachel's baby shower directly, but her betrayal hung over our preparations like a storm cloud. Every time my phone buzzed with a new message, I found myself wondering if it was another family member making excuses for why they couldn't attend Emma's service, or perhaps someone asking for directions to the garden club at SouthPark instead of Serenity Memorial Chapel. The first significant blow came at 7:30 when my cousin Jennifer called from her hotel room near the airport. Her voice was strained with exhaustion and frustration as she explained her dilemma. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to bother you this morning, but I need to understand what's happening with the family events today. I flew in from Virginia specifically for Emma's funeral, but I'm getting calls from relatives asking why I'm not attending Rachel's baby shower instead. My Aunt Patricia said she assumed I'd prefer the celebration over the funeral since it would be less depressing." The casual cruelty of that assessment hit me like a physical blow. Aunt Patricia had been at Emma's bedside during several hospital stays, had brought coloring books and puzzles to help pass long treatment days, had cried with me when we received the terminal diagnosis. Now she was characterizing my daughter's funeral as an optional depressing event that people might reasonably skip in favor of a party. Emma's funeral is at 2 o'clock at Serenity Memorial Chapel, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. The service will honor her life and provide closure for everyone who loved her. People are welcome to make their own choices about attendance, but this is where David and I will be saying goodbye to our daughter. Jennifer's response was immediate and firm. Of course that's where I'll be. I can't believe anyone would suggest otherwise. Emma was such a special little girl, and she deserves to have everyone who cared about her present for her farewell. I just wanted to make sure I had the correct information, because there seems to be a lot of confusion. After ending the call, I realized that Rachel's manipulation was creating exactly the kind of chaos and uncertainty she'd intended. By scheduling competing events, and then allowing others to spread confusion about priorities and expectations, she was ensuring that Emma's funeral would be diminished, even among people who initially planned to attend. The morning continued with a series of similar conversations. My college roommate called to confirm funeral details after receiving conflicting information from mutual friends. Our church organist needed clarification about timing because someone had told her the service might be postponed. Even Patricia Hayes, the funeral director, contacted me to verify our arrangements after receiving inquiries about potential scheduling changes. Each conversation required me to reassert basic facts about my daughter's funeral while subtly defending the appropriateness of proceeding as planned. The emotional labor of repeatedly explaining why a child's funeral took precedence over a baby shower was exhausting and infuriating, adding unnecessary stress to an already overwhelming day. By 10 o'clock, I decided to apply my professional event management skills to document exactly what Rachel had orchestrated. If people were going to force me to justify honoring my daughter's memory, I needed to approach this situation with the same strategic thinking I brought to complex corporate events where multiple stakeholders had competing interests and hidden agendas. I opened my laptop and created a detailed timeline of Rachel's actions, starting with her initial reaction to Emma's diagnosis and continuing through her deliberate scheduling conflict. Professional event planning had taught me that understanding the sequence of decisions and communications was essential for identifying patterns of behavior and predicting future actions. The timeline revealed a disturbing pattern of escalation. Rachel's selfishness hadn't emerged suddenly with her pregnancy announcement. Instead, it had been building systematically throughout Emma's illness, with each milestone in my daughter's decline coinciding with increasingly dramatic attention-seeking behavior from my sister. When Emma first entered the hospital for her initial chemotherapy round, Rachel had announced her engagement to Brad with an elaborate surprise party that dominated family conversations for weeks. When Emma lost her hair and we were adjusting to the visible signs of her illness, Rachel launched a social media campaign about trying to conceive that included daily updates and requests for fertility advice. When Emma's condition worsened, and we began discussing hospice care, Rachel revealed her pregnancy with professional maternity photos and a gender reveal celebration. The pattern was unmistakable. Rachel had been deliberately competing with Emma's medical crisis for family attention, treating my daughter's fight for life as an inconvenient distraction from her own life milestones. The baby shower scheduling. Conflict wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was the culmination of months of calculated attention-seeking behavior that reached its peak by directly sabotaging Emma's funeral. This realization shifted my perspective from hurt confusion to analytical clarity. Rachel's actions weren't driven by pregnancy hormones or poor planning skills. They represented a deliberate campaign to ensure she remained the center of family attention, even if it meant exploiting a dying child's medical crisis and manipulating a grieving mother's emotional vulnerability. Armed with this understanding, I began examining the specific tactics Rachel had employed to maximize the impact of her manipulation. The timing of her baby shower announcement, posted in our family group chat just days after Emma's death, had been carefully calculated to catch people during their most emotionally vulnerable moment. The venue selection at an expensive location required advance planning that contradicted any claims of impulsive decision-making. The guest list overlap was comprehensive enough to force maximum numbers of people into choosing between events. Most significantly, Rachel's communication strategy had been designed to avoid direct confrontation with me while maximizing social pressure on our extended family. By posting her announcement in a group chat rather than calling me directly, she'd created a public forum where people felt obligated to respond positively to avoid appearing unsupportive of her pregnancy. Meanwhile, she'd avoided any direct conversation about the scheduling conflict that might have revealed her awareness of the cruelty she was inflicting. This analysis helped me understand that Rachel's behavior required a strategic response rather than an emotional reaction. Professional event management had taught me that when dealing with difficult vendors or manipulative clients, success came from maintaining documentation, establishing clear boundaries, and focusing on objective outcomes, rather than personal grievances. I spent the next hour creating a comprehensive record of Rachel's communications and actions, including screenshots of her social media posts, summaries of phone conversations, and a detailed guest list analysis showing exactly which family members and friends would be forced to choose between events. This documentation would serve multiple purposes: providing clarity for my own decision-making, creating evidence for family members who questioned my assessment of the situation, and establishing a foundation for any future boundaries I needed to set with Rachel. The exercise also helped me recognize how my professional expertise could be applied to managing this personal crisis. Event planning success depended on anticipating problems, developing contingency plans, and maintaining focus on primary objectives, despite unexpected complications. Emma's funeral was the most important event I would ever coordinate, and Rachel's interference represented exactly the kind of disruption I'd learned to handle professionally. By 11:30, I had developed a clear strategy for managing the remainder of the day. First, I would focus entirely on ensuring Emma's funeral proceeded perfectly, regardless of attendance numbers or family drama. Second, I would document everyone's choices and responses for future reference in determining which relationships deserved continued investment. Third, I would avoid any direct engagement with Rachel's manipulation, refusing to be drawn into defending decisions that should have been obviously appropriate. This approach represented a fundamental shift from my usual family role as peacekeeper and problem solver. Instead of trying to manage Rachel's behavior or minimize family conflict, I would allow her actions to speak for themselves while focusing my energy on honoring Emma's memory appropriately. The first test of this strategy came when my mother called at noon, her voice tight with stress and barely contained anger. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about this afternoon. Your father and I have been getting calls all morning from family members who are confused about the timing of events. Some people are saying you and Rachel should have coordinated better to avoid conflicts. Others are suggesting we postpone Emma's funeral until next weekend so everyone can attend both events. The suggestion that I should postpone my daughter's funeral to accommodate my sister's party was so outrageous that I initially couldn't formulate a response. The idea that anyone would consider Emma's farewell service a flexible social obligation that could be rescheduled for convenience revealed a level of disrespect that challenged my fundamental assumptions about human decency. "Mom, Emma's funeral cannot and will not be postponed," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever used with my mother. "Every arrangement has been made with careful attention to honoring her memory and providing closure for people who loved her. The service will proceed as scheduled, and people can make their own choices about attendance." "I understand that, sweetheart, but Rachel is family too, and this is her first pregnancy. Some people feel torn between supporting you through grief and celebrating new life with her. Couldn't we find a compromise that allows everyone to participate in both events?" The suggestion that Emma's funeral should be treated as one component of a family's social calendar, balanced against competing entertainment options, crystallized everything wrong with our family dynamics. Rachel had succeeded in reducing my daughter's death to a scheduling inconvenience that required negotiation and compromise rather than respect and priority. "There is no compromise when it comes to my daughter's funeral," I replied firmly. "This isn't a casual family gathering that can be adjusted for everyone's convenience. Emma deserves to have people present who want to honor her memory, not people who feel obligated to make token appearances before rushing off to parties." The silence that followed suggested Mom was beginning to understand the magnitude of what Rachel had orchestrated and the impossible position her manipulation had created for our entire family. Finally, she spoke again, her voice small and defeated. "You're right, of course. I'm just trying to hold our family together during an already difficult time. But you shouldn't have to deal with this additional stress today of all days." "Rachel created this stress deliberately," I said, allowing some of my anger to show for the first time. "She knew exactly when Emma's funeral was scheduled, and she chose to create this conflict. I'm not responsible for managing the consequences of her cruelty, and neither are you." After ending the call, I realized that my strategic approach was already proving effective. By refusing to engage with the premise that Emma's funeral should be treated as a negotiable social obligation, I'd forced my mother to confront the reality of Rachel's behavior and its impact on our family. The documentation and analysis I'd completed that morning had given me the clarity and confidence to set appropriate boundaries rather than defaulting to my usual pattern of accommodation and conflict avoidance. David emerged from his office where he'd been grading papers as a distraction from pre-funeral anxiety. His expression was grim as he set his laptop aside and joined me in our living room. "I've been getting emails from school colleagues who heard about the scheduling conflict through their wives or church connections," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "People are asking if they should skip the funeral to avoid family drama, or if there's truth to rumors that we're postponing the service. The confusion Rachel has created is affecting even people outside our immediate family circle." This revelation highlighted another dimension of Rachel's cruelty that I hadn't fully considered. Her manipulation wasn't contained within our family. It was rippling outward to affect Emma's teachers, our neighbors, church members, and professional colleagues who wanted to support us but were confused by conflicting information and social pressures. Emma's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been planning to attend the funeral with several other staff members from Pineville Elementary. Emma's pediatric nurses from Carolina Medical Center had arranged their schedules to participate in saying goodbye to a patient who'd touched their hearts during months of treatment. Neighbors who'd watched Emma grow up and supported us through her illness deserved clear information about how to honor her memory appropriately. Rachel's calculated chaos was potentially depriving Emma of tribute from people who'd played meaningful roles in her short life, simply because they were confused about logistics or uncomfortable with family conflict they didn't understand. "I'm going to send a group email to Emma's school and medical team," I decided. "They deserve clear information about the funeral arrangements without having to navigate family drama they shouldn't be involved in." I spent the next 30 minutes crafting a message that provided practical details about Emma's funeral while subtly addressing the confusion Rachel had created. The email confirmed timing and location, expressed gratitude for their support during Emma's illness, and emphasized how much their presence would mean for honoring her memory appropriately. The responses began arriving within minutes, and their tone provided the first genuine comfort I'd experienced that morning. Mrs. Rodriguez confirmed that the entire second-grade team would attend and wanted to coordinate a special tribute involving Emma's classmates. The head nurse from the pediatric ward assured me that their planned attendance remained unchanged regardless of any other family events. Our church secretary clarified that all previously announced funeral arrangements remained in effect. These professional communications stood in stark contrast to the family conversations I'd been navigating all morning. Emma's teachers, medical team, and church community understood instinctively that a child's funeral deserved respect and priority, They didn't need explanations about why the service couldn't be postponed or justifications for why it took precedence over social celebrations. The contrast highlighted how Rachel's manipulation had corrupted even basic family relationships, forcing people who should have been sources of support to become participants in her attention-seeking drama. Professional colleagues and community members who barely knew our family dynamics were responding with more appropriate sensitivity than relatives who'd watched Emma grow up. By 1 o'clock, I was satisfied that Emma's funeral would proceed with dignity despite Rachel's interference. The people who truly mattered, those who'd formed genuine relationships with my daughter and understood the sacred nature of grief, would be present regardless of competing social obligations. The others would reveal themselves through their choices, providing valuable information about which relationships deserved continued investment in the future. As David and I prepared to leave for the chapel, I took one final look at Emma's bedroom, now filled with sunlight that illuminated her artwork covering the walls and her carefully arranged stuffed animal collection on the bed. In a few hours, we would say goodbye to our daughter in a service designed to celebrate her courage, kindness, and joy. Rachel's baby shower could proceed with whoever chose to prioritize celebration over compassion. Emma's funeral would be attended by people who understood that some occasions transcend social convenience and require presence rooted in love rather than obligation. The difference between those two gatherings would reveal everything I needed to know about the people in my life and the relationships worth preserving as I began the long journey of healing ahead. Rachel had inadvertently created a test of authentic character and genuine values. The results would be painful but ultimately clarifying, showing me exactly who deserved continued space in my life moving forward. My daughter's memory would be honored by people who recognized her worth and respected our grief. That was all that truly mattered as we prepared to celebrate Emma's life and begin saying goodbye to the brightest light our family had ever known. The drive to Serenity Memorial Chapel should have been a quiet time for final reflection before Emma's service, but my phone continued buzzing with messages that revealed the true scope of Rachel's calculated campaign. David navigated Charlotte's afternoon traffic while I documented each new piece of evidence that demonstrated just how extensively my sister had planned this betrayal. A text from my cousin Michael in Tennessee provided the most damning revelation yet. He'd received 2 separate phone calls about family events scheduled for that afternoon. The first call came from my Aunt Patricia, inviting him to Rachel's baby shower and mentioning that most of the family would be attending the celebration instead of Emma's funeral because it was more uplifting during difficult times. The second call came from Rachel directly, asking if he'd received her formal invitation and emphasizing how important his presence would be for her special day. What made Michael's account particularly significant was the timing. According to his phone records, both calls had occurred within 30 minutes of my original notification about Emma's funeral arrangements 3 weeks earlier. Rachel hadn't impulsively decided to schedule her baby shower in conflict with the funeral. She'd begun actively recruiting attendees for her competing event immediately after learning about our plans. This level of premeditation transformed my understanding of Rachel's behavior from thoughtless selfishness to calculated psychological warfare. She'd spent weeks systematically contacting family members to build attendance for her baby shower while simultaneously undermining support for Emma's funeral. Her strategy involved presenting her event as the family's preferred choice, while characterizing my daughter's service as an optional obligation that sensitive people might reasonably skip. The sophistication of her manipulation became even clearer when I received forwarded screenshots from my cousin Sarah Beth in Atlanta. Rachel had created a private social media group called Thompson Baby Celebration that included extended family members, mutual friends, and even some of Emma's former teachers who'd known Rachel through school connections. The group had been active for over 2 weeks, building excitement for the baby shower while carefully avoiding any mention of the scheduling conflict with Emma's funeral. Posts in the private group painted Rachel's baby shower as a long-anticipated family reunion that would bring together relatives who rarely saw each other. She'd shared elaborate planning details, coordinated group gifts, and even arranged carpools for out-of-town attendees. The messaging consistently emphasized the importance of being there for Rachel during her most important milestone, without ever acknowledging that family members might have competing obligations that same afternoon. Most manipulatively, Rachel had used the group to share carefully curated pregnancy updates and ultrasound photos designed to maximize emotional investment in her celebration. Posts about choosing baby names, preparing the nursery, and experiencing pregnancy milestones created a sense of intimate participation in her journey that would make declining her invitation feel like betraying shared experiences and emotional connections. The contrast with communications about Emma's funeral was stark and deliberate. While Rachel built excitement and anticipation for her baby shower through weeks of social media engagement, information about my daughter's service had been shared through individual phone calls focused on grief and logistics rather than celebration and community building. People felt emotionally connected to Rachel's pregnancy journey, but distanced from Emma's death by the clinical nature of funeral planning. Communications. This asymmetry revealed another layer of Rachel's strategic thinking. She understood that attendance at social events was influenced not just by obligation, but by emotional investment and social connectivity. By creating an elaborate digital community around her baby shower while allowing Emma's funeral to remain an isolated, tragic event, she'd engineered social dynamics that naturally drew people toward her celebration. As we arrived at Serenity Memorial Chapel, I realized that Rachel's manipulation had accomplished something far more destructive than simply stealing attendance from Emma's funeral. She'd corrupted the very nature of how our family and community processed grief, turning my daughter's death into one option among competing social obligations, rather than a sacred moment that demanded respect and priority. The chapel parking lot told the story of Rachel's success with brutal efficiency. Instead of the filled spaces I'd expected based on initial responses to funeral arrangements, only about 30 cars occupied the lot that could accommodate nearly 100 vehicles. The contrast with my projections was devastating, suggesting that Rachel's recruitment efforts had been even more effective than the evidence I'd already uncovered. Patricia Hayes, the funeral director, met us at the chapel entrance with professional composure that couldn't quite mask her surprise at the sparse attendance. In her 25 years of managing memorial services, she'd clearly never encountered a situation where a child's funeral competed with a family party for guests. "Mrs. Mitchell, everything is prepared exactly as you requested," she said gently, her voice carrying the practiced calm that characterized her interactions with grieving families. "The flowers are beautiful, the music selections are ready, and the reception area is set up for afterward. We've had a few people call asking about timing or directions, but that's normal for afternoon services." Her diplomatic phrasing didn't acknowledge the obvious reality that Emma's funeral was significantly underattended, but her expression conveyed understanding of the unusual circumstances. Professional funeral directors were accustomed to family conflicts and social complications, but Rachel's sabotage represented something beyond typical interpersonal drama. Inside the chapel, the scene was both heartbreaking and illuminating. The people who had chosen to attend Emma's funeral represented the authentic core of relationships that had sustained us through her illness and would continue supporting us through grief. Mrs. Rodriguez sat with 3 other teachers from Pineville, elementary, all dressed in the bright colors Emma had loved rather than traditional black mourning attire. The pediatric nursing team occupied an entire pew, some of them still wearing hospital scrubs because they'd come directly from their shifts to pay respects to a patient who'd touched their hearts. Our church family filled several rows, including elderly members who rarely attended afternoon events, but had made special arrangements to honor Emma's memory. Neighbors from our street in Pineville were present with their children, some of whom had been Emma's playmates and classmates. David's colleagues from the high school had coordinated their attendance, bringing flowers from the student council that Emma had visited during a school fundraiser for pediatric cancer research. The attendance pattern revealed something profound. about authentic relationships versus social obligations. Every person present had formed a genuine connection with Emma based on shared experiences, mutual affection, or professional caring. They weren't there because of family pressure, social expectations, or fear of appearing insensitive. They'd chosen to prioritize honoring a 7-year-old's memory over competing social activities because they understood the sacred nature of the occasion. Conversely, the people who'd chosen Rachel's baby shower over Emma's funeral had revealed their true priorities and character. Extended family members who'd claimed to love Emma during hospital visits but couldn't be bothered to attend her farewell service. Family friends who'd sent sympathy cards but considered a party more appealing than a memorial. Relatives who'd prioritized social celebration over supporting grieving parents during their most difficult day. The distinction was painful, but ultimately clarifying. Rachel's manipulation had inadvertently performed a valuable service by separating authentic relationships from superficial social connections. The people gathered in Serenity Memorial Chapel represented the genuine community that would support David and me through the healing process ahead, while those attending the garden club at SouthPark had revealed themselves as fair-weather acquaintances, unworthy of continued emotional investment. As the service began, I felt an unexpected sense of peace despite the sparse attendance. Emma's funeral was proceeding exactly as she would have wanted, surrounded by people who genuinely loved her, filled with bright flowers and joyful music, focused on celebrating her courage and kindness rather than dwelling on loss and sadness. The quality of presence mattered far more than quantity of attendees. Mrs. Rodriguez delivered a moving tribute about Emma's curiosity and determination in the classroom, sharing stories about her insistence on reading above grade level and her habit of bringing extra snacks for classmates who forgot their lunches. The pediatric nurses spoke about Emma's care for other young patients, her decoration of the children's ward with handmade artwork, and her efforts to cheer up kids who were struggling with their own medical treatments. David's eulogy captured Emma's infectious enthusiasm for life and her ability to find joy even during the most difficult medical procedures. He shared memories of her bedtime stories, her elaborate art projects that covered our refrigerator, and her plans for the garden she'd wanted to plant behind our house. His words painted a picture of a child who'd lived fully despite her brief time with us, touching lives in ways that would continue inspiring others long after her death. The service concluded with Emma's favorite song, "You Are My Sunshine," performed by our church choir with harmonies that filled the chapel with warmth and hope. As the final notes faded, I felt profound gratitude for every person who'd chosen to be present for this sacred farewell, and clarity about the relationships that truly mattered moving forward. The reception afterward provided additional confirmation of the genuine community that had formed around Emma during her illness. People shared specific memories of her impact on their lives, offered concrete support for the difficult months ahead, and made commitments to honor her memory through ongoing actions rather than temporary gestures. Mrs. Rodriguez announced that Pineville Elementary would be creating a memorial garden in Emma's honor, funded by donations from staff and families. The pediatric nursing team revealed plans for an annual scholarship program supporting families dealing with childhood cancer, inspired by Emma's example of finding ways to help others despite her own challenges. Church members discussed establishing a comfort closet for families facing medical crises, stocked with items Emma had identified as most helpful during hospital stays. These tangible commitments to continuing Emma's legacy of kindness and service stood in stark contrast to the empty social gestures that characterized most family interactions. The people who'd chosen her funeral over Rachel's party were already translating their presence into meaningful action that would honor her memory, through sustained effort rather than momentary attention. As the reception wound down and guests began departing, I received the first reports about Rachel's baby shower from family members who'd felt obligated to attend but were already regretting their choice. My cousin Jennifer, who'd driven from Virginia specifically for Emma's funeral, had ultimately felt pressured to make a token appearance at Rachel's celebration to avoid family conflict. Her text message revealed the stark contrast between the two gatherings. "Sarah, I made a huge mistake. Rachel's baby shower is exactly what you'd expect. All about her. No mention of Emma. People acting like today is just another party. The whole thing feels wrong after missing your beautiful service for Emma. I'm leaving early, and I'm ashamed I let family pressure influence my decision. Emma deserved better, and so do you. Similar messages began arriving from other family members who'd chosen Rachel's event, but were struggling with guilt and regret as they witnessed the difference between authentic grief support and superficial social celebration. My Uncle Mark, who'd enthusiastically responded to Rachel's initial invitation, sent an apologetic text describing the baby shower as uncomfortable and inappropriate, given the timing conflict with Emma's funeral. These reports confirmed what I'd suspected about Rachel's event. While Emma's funeral had focused on honoring her memory and supporting her loved ones through grief, the baby shower was entirely centered on Rachel's desire for attention and celebration. The timing conflict hadn't been an unfortunate coincidence. It had been a deliberate strategy to force people to choose between supporting genuine need and indulging manufactured drama. The most revealing report came from my Aunt Patricia, who'd been one of Rachel's most vocal supporters in the family group chat. Her phone call that evening carried shame and regret that transformed her usual confident tone into hesitant apology. "Sarah, I owe you a tremendous apology. I was wrong about today, and I'm ashamed of how I handled the situation. Rachel's baby shower was everything you'd expect from someone who schedules a party to compete with a child's funeral. She spent the entire time complaining about people who didn't attend, making snide comments about family members who chose depression over celebration, and generally acting like a spoiled child who didn't get enough attention." Aunt Patricia's description revealed that Rachel had used her baby shower not just to steal attendance from Emma's funeral, but as a platform for criticizing family members who'd made the opposite choice. Rather than graciously accepting the celebration she'd manipulated people into attending, she'd spent the event expressing resentment toward those who'd prioritized my daughter's memory over her pregnancy milestone. She actually said that Emma had gotten enough attention during her illness, and that it was time for the family to focus on life and hope for the future, instead of dwelling on sad events, Aunt Patricia continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "I can't believe I supported someone capable of such cruelty. Emma was our angel, and she deserved so much better than what happened today." This revelation provided the final piece of evidence I needed to understand Rachel's true character and motivations. Her behavior wasn't driven by pregnancy hormones, poor judgment, or even ordinary selfishness. It represented a fundamental lack of empathy and human decency that had been masked by family enabling and social expectations, but was now fully exposed through her treatment of a grieving family during their most vulnerable moment. The phone calls and messages continued throughout the evening, with family members who'd attended Rachel's baby shower expressing regret, shame, and requests for forgiveness. The contrast between the two events had been so stark that even people who'd initially supported Rachel's decision were forced to confront the reality of what they'd participated in versus what they'd missed. By midnight, I had received apologies from nearly every family member who'd chosen the baby shower over Emma's funeral. Their regret was genuine, and their shame was appropriate, but their choices had revealed something about their character and priorities that couldn't be easily forgotten or forgiven. When faced with a clear moral choice between supporting grief and indulging selfishness, they'd chosen wrong, and no amount of retroactive regret could change that reality. The documentation I'd compiled throughout the day painted a comprehensive picture of Rachel's calculated campaign to sabotage Emma's funeral and the family dynamics that had enabled her success. Her manipulation had been methodical, sophisticated, and designed to exploit every weakness in our family's communication patterns and relationship dynamics. More importantly, the events of Emma's funeral day had created perfect clarity about which relationships deserved continued investment and which people had revealed themselves unworthy of trust and consideration. The people who'd chosen to honor, My daughter's memory, despite social pressure and family conflict, represented the authentic community that would support David and me through healing. Those who'd prioritized Rachel's party over Emma's farewell had shown their true character and forfeited any claim to meaningful space in our lives moving forward. Rachel's cruelty had inadvertently performed a valuable service by forcing everyone in our extended family and social circle to reveal their genuine priorities and values. The results were painful, but ultimately clarifying, providing the foundation for rebuilding relationships based on authentic connection rather than superficial social obligation. The week following Emma's funeral brought a steady stream of family members seeking forgiveness for their choices, but I found myself approaching their apologies with the same analytical detachment I applied to vendor contracts in my event planning work. Each conversation revealed not just regret about missing Emma's service, but deeper character flaws that had been exposed through Rachel's manipulation test. My cousin Michael drove down from Tennessee specifically to apologize in person, arriving at our house on Tuesday evening with flowers and a photo album he'd compiled of Emma's visits to his family over the years. His shame was genuine as he explained how Rachel had convinced him that attending her baby shower was the family expectation, and that Emma's funeral would be too emotionally difficult for his young children to handle. She made it sound like everyone was going to her celebration and that you'd understand people wanting to focus on life and hope instead of sadness, he said, his voice heavy with guilt. I realize now how manipulative that was, but at the time it seemed like she was offering people an acceptable alternative to a painful obligation. His explanation revealed exactly how Rachel had framed her competing event to maximize attendance, while minimizing moral conflict for potential guests. By presenting her baby shower as the family's preferred gathering and characterizing Emma's funeral as an optional sad event that people might reasonably avoid, she'd given family members permission to choose celebration over compassion while feeling justified in their decision. The worst part was realizing during her party that she'd planned this conflict deliberately, Michael continued. She kept making comments about people who chose to dwell on negative things instead of celebrating new life. She actually seemed pleased that her event was better attended than Emma's funeral, like she'd won some kind of competition. This confirmation of Rachel's satisfaction with her successful sabotage eliminated any remaining possibility that her actions had been driven by poor judgment rather than calculated cruelty. She hadn't just created a scheduling conflict. She'd actively celebrated her success in diminishing Emma's farewell service while expressing contempt for family members who'd prioritized grief support over party attendance. Similar conversations continued throughout the week, each one providing additional evidence of Rachel's sophisticated manipulation campaign and the moral failures it had exposed in our extended family. People who'd claimed to love Emma during her illness had revealed their true priorities when forced to choose between supporting her memory and indulging Rachel's attention-seeking behavior. The most difficult conversation came from my own parents, who visited on Thursday evening to address their role in enabling Rachel's behavior throughout our lives, and specifically during Emma's final months. Dad's usual protective deflection of Rachel's actions was replaced by genuine remorse as he acknowledged the pattern of favoritism and excuse-making that had contributed to her sense of entitlement. "We failed both of you girls in different ways," he admitted, his voice breaking with emotion. "We protected Rachel from consequences instead of teaching her empathy and responsibility. And we expected you to accommodate her selfishness instead of setting appropriate boundaries. Emma's funeral should have been sacred, and we should have shut down any discussion of competing events immediately." Mom's tears came as she described watching Rachel's behavior at the baby shower and finally recognizing the monster they'd created through decades of enabling and special treatment. She spent the entire party complaining about family members who hadn't attended, making cruel comments about people who chose sadness over joy, and acting like Emma's death was an inconvenience that was interfering with her celebration. Their apologies were necessary, but couldn't undo the damage their parenting choices had created, or repair the trust that had been shattered through their initial hesitation about prioritizing Emma's funeral over Rachel's party. The fact that they'd even entertained suggestions about postponing my daughter's service revealed how thoroughly Rachel's manipulation had corrupted their judgment and moral clarity. By Friday, I had compiled a comprehensive record of the entire situation, including Rachel's systematic campaign to sabotage Emma's funeral, the family members who'd been successfully manipulated into choosing her celebration, and the aftermath of regret and shame that followed when people realized what they'd participated in. The documentation served multiple purposes, providing closure for my own understanding of events, creating evidence for family members who questioned my assessment of Rachel's behavior, and establishing a foundation for the boundaries I needed to set moving forward. The pattern that emerged from this analysis was clear and damning. Rachel had spent months treating Emma's terminal illness as a personal inconvenience that interfered with her own life milestones. Her pregnancy announcement, baby shower planning, and systematic recruitment of family support had been deliberately timed to compete with Emma's medical crisis and ultimate death. The scheduling conflict with Emma's funeral wasn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It was the culmination of a sustained campaign to ensure she remained the center of family attention, even during a child's fight for life. This understanding transformed my approach to handling Rachel's behavior and its consequences. Instead of trying to repair relationships damaged by her manipulation or minimize family conflict through accommodation and forgiveness, I decided to apply the same strategic thinking I used in my professional work to establish clear boundaries and consequences based on demonstrated character rather than claimed intentions. The first step involved complete cessation of direct communication with Rachel. Her behavior had revealed a fundamental lack of empathy and human decency that couldn't be addressed through conversation or conflict resolution. People capable of scheduling parties to compete with children's funerals weren't amenable to reasoning or moral appeals. They required firm boundaries and consistent consequences to prevent continued harm. The second step involved selective relationship management with family members who'd been manipulated by Rachel's campaign. People who'd shown genuine remorse and taken concrete actions to make amends would have opportunities to rebuild trust through demonstrated change in behavior. Those who offered superficial apologies while minimizing their choices or expecting immediate forgiveness would face continued distance and reduced access to our lives. The third step involved leveraging my professional skills and network to create positive outcomes from the crisis Rachel had generated. Just as successful event planning required turning unexpected challenges into opportunities for improvement, I could transform the clarity gained through this experience into a foundation for more authentic relationships and meaningful life choices. This strategic approach began yielding results almost immediately. The people who'd attended Emma's funeral, despite social pressure and family conflict, became the core community supporting David and me through early grief recovery. Mrs. Rodriguez and her teaching team provided practical assistance with memorial projects and emotional support during difficult moments. The pediatric nursing staff maintained regular contact, sharing resources for bereaved parents and including us in support. Groups for families who'd lost children to cancer. Our church family rallied around us with sustained practical help rather than temporary gestures. Neighbors coordinated meal deliveries, yard maintenance, and household assistance that allowed us to focus on healing without worrying about daily logistics. David's colleagues covered his classes and administrative responsibilities, giving him time and space to process grief without professional pressure. Most significantly, the authentic relationships revealed through Rachel's manipulation provided a foundation for rebuilding life with greater intentionality and purpose. Instead of maintaining superficial connections with extended family members who'd revealed their true priorities, I could invest emotional energy in relationships characterized by genuine care and mutual support. The memorial projects that emerged from Emma's funeral community created lasting tributes to her memory while addressing real needs in our community. Pineville Elementary's Memorial Garden became a place where children could learn about kindness, courage, and finding joy despite Difficult circumstances. The Pediatric Nursing Scholarship Program provided financial assistance for families facing childhood cancer while honoring Emma's example of caring for other young patients. The church comfort closet, stocked with items Emma had identified as most helpful during hospital stays, served families dealing with medical crises while continuing her legacy of practical compassion. Each project represented authentic action rather than empty gesture, creating tangible improvements in other people's lives while keeping Emma's spirit alive through ongoing service. These positive outcomes stood in stark contrast to the shallow displays of sympathy and support that had characterized most family interactions during Emma's illness. People who'd sent flowers and sympathy cards but couldn't be bothered to attend her funeral had revealed the superficial nature of their concern. Those who'd prioritized Rachel's party over Emma's memory had shown that their support evaporated when it required genuine sacrifice or inconvenience. 3 months after Emma's funeral, I received an unexpected opportunity that perfectly demonstrated how Rachel's cruelty had inadvertently created space for authentic growth and professional advancement. The Charlotte Convention and Visitors Bureau contacted me about developing memorial event planning services for families dealing with loss, inspired by reports of how beautifully Emma's funeral had honored her memory, despite challenging circumstances. The position would involve applying my event coordination expertise to help grieving families create meaningful tributes for their loved ones while navigating complex family dynamics and social pressures. My experience managing Rachel's sabotage attempt had provided unique qualifications for understanding how manipulation and conflict could disrupt sacred occasions, along with strategies for maintaining focus on primary objectives despite external interference. Accepting this role represented a fundamental shift from traditional wedding and corporate event planning to work that directly addressed human suffering and transformation. The skills I'd developed organizing celebrations would now serve families during their most vulnerable moments, helping them create lasting memories and appropriate closure despite grief and chaos. The irony wasn't lost on me that Rachel's attempt to sabotage Emma's funeral had led directly to professional opportunities that aligned with my deepest values and most meaningful experiences. Her cruelty had forced me to apply my expertise to personal crisis management, revealing capabilities I hadn't recognized, and opening doors to work that would honor Emma's memory while serving other families facing similar challenges. 6 months after Emma's death, David and I had established new routines and relationships that reflected authentic priorities rather than social obligations. Our social circle consisted primarily of people who demonstrated genuine care during our crisis, creating a community characterized by mutual support rather than superficial pleasantries. Family interactions were limited to relatives who'd shown real character through their choices and actions, rather than those who expected forgiveness without changed behavior. Rachel's continued attempts to reestablish contact were met with consistent boundaries and consequences. Her letters, calls, and social media messages went unanswered, while family members who tried to advocate for reconciliation were informed that relationship restoration required acknowledgement of harm caused and demonstrated change in behavior, rather than explanations or justifications. The documentation I'd compiled during her manipulation campaign served as a reminder of why these boundaries were necessary and appropriate. People capable of exploiting a child's death for personal attention represented genuine threats to emotional well-being that required ongoing vigilance rather than naive forgiveness. Most family members eventually accepted the reality of these permanent changes in relationship dynamics, recognizing that Rachel's behavior had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed through apologies or time. Those who continued pressuring for reconciliation revealed their own character flaws and faced reduced access to our lives as a natural consequence of their choices. 1 year after Emma's funeral, the memorial garden at Pineville Elementary was completed and dedicated in a ceremony that brought together everyone who genuinely supported our family during Emma's illness and death. The space included flowers Emma had loved, benches for quiet reflection, and educational displays about childhood cancer awareness and prevention. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about Emma's impact on her classroom and school community, sharing stories about her kindness toward struggling classmates and her determination to keep learning despite medical treatments. The pediatric nurses described how Emma's example had inspired changes in their patient care approaches, emphasizing emotional support and family involvement alongside medical interventions. The ceremony concluded with the release of yellow balloons, Emma's favorite color, carrying messages of love and hope written by children from her school and families from the medical community. As the balloons disappeared into Charlotte's spring sky, I felt profound gratitude for the authentic community that had formed around Emma's memory and continued honoring her legacy through meaningful action. The contrast with Rachel's empty, social gestures and attention-seeking behavior couldn't have been clearer. While my sister had sought to exploit our family's grief for personal advantage, the people gathered in Emma's memorial garden had transformed their care into lasting improvements in other people's lives. Rachel's baby shower had been forgotten within weeks of its occurrence, leaving no trace beyond temporary photos and superficial congratulations. Emma's funeral had generated ongoing projects, relationships, and commitments that continued growing, stronger with time, creating ripple effects of kindness and service that honored her memory through sustained action rather than momentary attention. 2 years after Emma's death, my work with memorial event planning had expanded into a consulting practice that served families throughout the southeastern United States. The expertise I'd gained navigating Rachel's manipulation had provided unique qualifications for helping other families protect sacred occasions from interference and conflict, while maintaining focus on authentic tribute and meaningful closure. Each family I worked with faced different challenges, but the principles remained consistent. Genuine relationships were revealed through crisis. Authentic support required sacrifice and inconvenience, and memorial services deserved protection from competing social obligations regardless of family pressure or manipulation attempts. My professional success in this field represented the ultimate transformation of Rachel's cruelty into purposeful service. Her attempt to sabotage Emma's funeral had forced me to develop expertise in crisis management, boundary setting, and authentic relationship identification that now helped hundreds of other families honor their loved ones appropriately despite challenging circumstances. The memorial event planning practice also provided ongoing connection to Emma's legacy, allowing me to apply lessons learned from her courage and kindness to serve other families facing similar losses. Each successful memorial service represented another victory of authentic love over manipulative selfishness, another demonstration that genuine character always triumphed over superficial social pressures. David had found his own path to healing through establishing a scholarship fund for students pursuing teaching careers in memory of Emma's love of learning and curiosity about the world. His grief had transformed into purpose through creating opportunities for future educators who would carry forward Emma's enthusiasm for discovery and growth. Together, we'd built a life that honored Emma's memory through meaningful action rather than empty ceremony, authentic relationships rather than social obligations, and purposeful service rather than superficial gestures. Rachel's betrayal had inadvertently created the catalyst for this transformation, forcing us to distinguish between genuine support and manipulative behavior while revealing the true character of everyone in our extended community. The woman, who'd scheduled a baby shower to compete with a child's funeral, had ultimately demonstrated the power of authentic love to overcome calculated cruelty. Emma's brief life had generated more lasting positive impact than Rachel's elaborate attention-seeking campaigns, proving that genuine character and purpose always prevailed over manipulation and selfishness. 3 years after Emma's funeral, Rachel made one final attempt to re-establish contact through a letter delivered to our home address. The envelope contained a lengthy apology, acknowledging the cruelty of her actions and requesting opportunities for reconciliation and family healing. The tone was carefully crafted to sound contrite and reformed, but the timing revealed continued manipulation. Rachel's letter arrived exactly 1 week before the 3rd anniversary of Emma's death, ensuring maximum emotional impact during our most vulnerable annual period. The content focused primarily on her own suffering and isolation as consequences of her choices, rather than genuine recognition of harm caused to others. Most tellingly, the apology included requests for specific actions we should take to facilitate her reintegration into family relationships, rather than offering concrete changes in her own behavior. The letter went unanswered and was filed with the rest of my documentation about Rachel's manipulation campaign. 3 years of boundary maintenance had created peace and stability in our lives that didn't require disruption through renewed contact with someone who'd revealed her true character so completely. Some relationships couldn't be repaired because they'd never been authentic to begin with, and some people forfeited their right to continued access through choices that revealed fundamental character flaws. Emma's 3rd memorial anniversary was observed with the same community of authentic supporters who'd attended her funeral, despite Rachel's interference. The memorial garden had grown into a beloved community space where children learned about kindness and courage while families found comfort during difficult times. The scholarship programs continued providing assistance for families facing childhood cancer and supporting future teachers who would inspire curiosity and learning in their students. Most significantly, the memorial event planning practice had helped hundreds of families create meaningful tributes for their loved ones while protecting sacred occasions from manipulation and conflict. Each successful service represented another victory of authentic love over calculated selfishness, another demonstration that genuine character always triumphed over superficial social pressure. Rachel's attempt to sabotage Emma's funeral had ultimately created a test that revealed the true nature of every relationship in our extended community. The results had been painful, but ultimately clarifying, providing the foundation for rebuilding life around authentic connections and meaningful purpose rather than social obligations and superficial pleasantries. The sister who'd called my daughter's funeral a minor event had inadvertently demonstrated the profound impact of a child whose brief life generated lasting positive change in countless other lives. Emma's memory lived on, not through empty ceremonies or social media tributes, but through ongoing acts of kindness, service, and love that honored her legacy every single day. The choice between attending a baby shower or a child's funeral had revealed everything anyone needed to know about character, priorities, and the relationships worth preserving. Those who'd chosen correctly had become the foundation of a community, dedicated to transforming grief into purpose and loss into lasting positive impact. Those who'd chosen incorrectly had revealed themselves unworthy of continued investment and access to our authentic selves. In the end, Rachel's cruelty had created the exact opposite of what she'd intended. Instead of diminishing Emma's memory and stealing attention for herself, she'd provided the catalyst for transformation that honored our daughter's life through meaningful service, while exposing the superficial nature of relationships based on social obligation, rather than genuine. Care. The funeral that Rachel had tried to sabotage had become the foundation for a life of purpose and authentic connection that continued growing stronger with each passing year. The baby shower she'd prioritized was remembered only as an example of how manipulation and selfishness ultimately failed when confronted with genuine love and character. Emma's legacy lived on through every family helped by memorial event planning services, every student supported by scholarship programs, every child who found comfort in her memorial garden, and every act of kindness inspired by her example of courage and compassion during life's most difficult challenges. 5 years after Emma's funeral, I stood in the conference room of Charlotte Memorial Hospital, presenting my memorial event planning services to their grief counseling department. The invitation had come from Dr. Rebecca Chen, the hospital's new director of family support services, who'd heard about my work from colleagues at Carolina Medical Center, where Emma had received her cancer treatment. What sets your approach apart from traditional funeral planning is your understanding of how family dynamics can complicate grief, Dr. Chen observed as I concluded my presentation. Too many families find their attempts to honor loved ones disrupted by relatives who treat memorial services as social events, rather than sacred occasions. Her assessment reflected exactly the expertise I'd developed through navigating Rachel's sabotage of Emma's funeral and subsequently helping hundreds of other families protect their memorial services from similar interference. The crisis that had initially devastated me had ultimately created a specialized skill set that proved invaluable for families facing loss during complicated circumstances. My experience taught me that memorial planning requires not just logistical coordination, but strategic thinking about family psychology and potential conflict points, I explained. Grief makes people vulnerable to manipulation, and sacred occasions deserve protection from relatives who might exploit tragedy for personal attention or advantage. The hospital's interest in my services reflected a growing recognition within the medical community that families needed more than clinical grief support. They required practical assistance in creating meaningful tributes while managing complex interpersonal dynamics during emotionally volatile periods. My combination of professional event planning expertise and hard-won personal experience with family manipulation provided exactly the specialized assistance many bereaved families desperately needed. Dr. Chen's team had identified multiple cases where family conflicts had disrupted memorial services or prevented appropriate closure for grieving relatives. Her research revealed patterns disturbingly similar to what Rachel had orchestrated: attention-seeking relatives scheduling competing events, manipulative family members undermining memorial plans, and grief-stricken individuals being pressured to accommodate inappropriate demands during their most vulnerable moments. We've had families where siblings fought over funeral arrangements to the point that services were canceled entirely, Dr. Chen shared. Others where extended relatives treated memorial receptions as networking opportunities, or where competing family factions created such tension that genuine mourning became impossible. These examples confirmed that Rachel's behavior, while particularly cruel in its timing and calculation, represented a broader pattern of family dysfunction that emerged during crisis periods. People who might maintain superficial civility during normal circumstances often revealed their true character when faced with death, grief, and the social dynamics surrounding memorial events. The hospital contract represented a significant expansion of my memorial planning practice, but more importantly, it provided opportunities to help families navigate exactly the kind of manipulation and interference that had nearly destroyed Emma's funeral. Each successful memorial service where authentic grief was honored and family conflicts were managed appropriately felt like another victory over the selfish behavior that had characterized Rachel's sabotage attempt. Working with hospital families also reinforced lessons I'd learned through my own experience about the difference between genuine support and performative sympathy. Relatives who truly cared about grieving families showed up consistently with practical assistance and emotional presence. Those who viewed tragedy as social opportunity revealed themselves through attention-seeking behavior, inappropriate timing of personal announcements, and failure to provide sustained support beyond initial gestures. The parallels to my own family's dynamics were unmistakable and healing. Each time I helped a family establish boundaries against manipulative relatives or protected a memorial service from inappropriate interference, I felt renewed gratitude for the clarity Rachel's cruelty had ultimately provided about authentic relationships versus superficial social connections. 6 months into the hospital consulting work, I received an unexpected call from my former colleague Jessica Barnes, who'd moved to Nashville and was dealing with her own family crisis. Her grandmother had passed away, and Jessica was struggling with similar interference from relatives who seemed more interested in social drama than supporting genuine grief. "I keep thinking about what happened with Emma's funeral and how you handled Rachel's manipulation," Jessica said during our phone conversation. "My cousin is trying to turn Grandma's memorial into some kind of family reunion with party planning and social media campaigns. It feels wrong, but I don't know how to address it without creating more conflict." Her situation provided an opportunity to apply lessons learned from my experience while helping someone navigate similar challenges with family members who prioritized attention over authenticity. The strategies I'd developed for identifying manipulative behavior, establishing protective boundaries, and maintaining focus on memorial purposes rather than social obligations proved directly transferable to Jessica's circumstances. The key is recognizing that people who genuinely care about honoring your grandmother's memory will support whatever approach brings peace and closure to immediate family, I advised. Anyone who treats her memorial as an opportunity for personal agenda or social entertainment has revealed their true priorities and doesn't deserve influence over sacred decisions. Our conversation reminded me how Rachel's betrayal had inadvertently equipped me with expertise that extended far beyond my own healing process. The analytical skills I'd developed for documenting manipulation tactics, the boundary-setting techniques I'd learned through establishing consequences for inappropriate behavior, and the relationship evaluation methods I'd created for distinguishing authentic support from superficial gestures had become valuable resources for other people facing similar challenges. Jessica's grateful response to my guidance reinforced the positive transformation that had emerged from Rachel's cruelty. What she'd intended as a devastating blow to Emma's memory had ultimately created opportunities for me to help protect other families from experiencing similar sabotage during their most vulnerable moments. The 7th anniversary of Emma's death approached with the same community of authentic supporters who'd consistently honored her memory through meaningful action rather than empty gestures. The Memorial Garden at Pineville Elementary had become a model program replicated at schools throughout North Carolina, providing spaces where children learned about courage, kindness, and finding joy despite life's challenges. Mrs. Rodriguez, now the school's principal, had transformed Emma's legacy into a comprehensive character education curriculum that reached thousands of students annually. The program emphasized practical compassion, resilience during difficult circumstances, and the importance of supporting classmates facing personal crises. Each lesson built upon values Emma had demonstrated during her brief life and illness. Emma's example continues inspiring new generations of children to choose kindness over cruelty and empathy over selfishness, Mrs. Rodriguez explained during our annual Memorial Garden ceremony. Her impact grows stronger each year as students learn to apply her lessons in their own relationships and challenges. The Pediatric Nursing Scholarship Program had expanded beyond Carolina Medical Center to include hospitals throughout the southeastern United States, providing financial assistance for families dealing with childhood illness while supporting nursing education focused on family-centered care. The program's success had attracted national attention and additional funding, ensuring its sustainability and continued growth. Most significantly, my memorial event planning practice had grown into a consulting firm that trained other professionals in managing family dynamics during grief support. The expertise gained through surviving Rachel's manipulation had become a specialized field addressing a widespread need for protecting sacred occasions from inappropriate interference. The training programs I'd developed helped funeral directors, hospital staff, and grief counselors recognize manipulation tactics, establish appropriate boundaries with difficult family members, and maintain focus on authentic memorial purposes despite external pressure. Each professional equipped with these skills represented dozens of families who would receive better support during their most vulnerable moments. The ripple effects of Emma's brief life continued expanding in ways that honored her memory through lasting positive impact. Meanwhile, Rachel's elaborate attention-seeking campaigns had been forgotten by everyone except those who'd been harmed by her manipulation. The contrast perfectly illustrated the difference between authentic legacy and superficial performance. On Emma's 7th memorial anniversary, I received a card from a family I'd helped the previous year, whose teenage son had died in a car accident. Their memorial service had been threatened by the boy's estranged uncle, who'd attempted to use the funeral as a platform for airing family grievances and settling personal scores. The strategies I'd provided for managing his interference had allowed the family to honor their son's memory peacefully while maintaining appropriate boundaries against inappropriate behavior. Your guidance helped us create exactly the kind of farewell our son deserved. the mother wrote. We were able to focus on celebrating his life and supporting each other through grief instead of managing family drama and manipulation. Thank you for protecting something sacred during our darkest time. Letters like these arrived regularly, confirming that Rachel's cruelty had ultimately created expertise that served hundreds of families facing similar challenges. Each successful memorial service where authentic grief was honored and manipulative interference was prevented represented another victory of genuine love over calculated selfishness. The memorial event planning practice had also revealed surprising connections between my experience and broader social issues. The manipulation tactics Rachel had employed, the family-enabling patterns that had supported her entitled behavior, and the social pressures that had initially confused genuine supporters, paralleled dynamics found in many contexts where vulnerable people faced exploitation by attention-seeking relatives or acquaintances. Training programs for healthcare workers, social services staff, and community organizations increasingly requested my expertise in recognizing and addressing these patterns. The skills developed through surviving personal betrayal had applications. In professional settings where protecting vulnerable populations from manipulation was essential for providing appropriate care and support. 8 years after Emma's funeral, David and I had built a life that honored her memory through purposeful action while maintaining the authentic relationships revealed through Rachel's manipulation test. Our social circle consisted entirely of people who demonstrated genuine character during our family crisis, creating a community characterized by mutual support, shared values, and commitment to meaningful service. Family interactions remained limited to relatives who'd shown real integrity through their choices and continued demonstrating growth in empathy and authenticity. Those who'd prioritized Rachel's baby shower over Emma's funeral had revealed character flaws that disqualified them from access to our emotional lives, regardless of subsequent apologies or attempts at reconciliation. The boundaries established during our crisis had created space for relationships based on genuine connection rather than social obligation. Friends and family members who remained in our lives had earned their place through consistent demonstration of values that aligned with our commitment to authenticity, service, and protection of vulnerable people from exploitation. Rachel's sporadic attempts at re-establishing contact continued being met with consistent non-response. The documentation compiled during her manipulation campaign served as a permanent reminder of why these boundaries were necessary and appropriate. People capable of exploiting a child's death for personal attention represented ongoing threats to emotional well-being that required vigilant protection rather than naive forgiveness. The memorial event planning practice had evolved into a comprehensive resource for families facing loss during complicated circumstances. Services included not just logistical coordination, but strategic consultation on managing difficult relatives, educational workshops on recognizing manipulation during grief, and ongoing support for maintaining appropriate boundaries while processing loss. The work provided continuous opportunities to transform personal healing into service for others while honoring Emma's legacy through practical compassion. Each family helped represented another demonstration that authentic love and genuine character ultimately triumphed over manipulation and selfishness, just as Emma's brief life had created more lasting positive impact than Rachel's elaborate, attention-seeking campaigns. 10 years after Emma's death, the Memorial Garden at Pineville Elementary hosted its annual celebration of kindness, featuring presentations by students who'd implemented community service projects inspired by Emma's example. The event had grown into a district-wide recognition program that highlighted children who demonstrated courage, compassion, and resilience in their daily lives. As I watched dozens of young people share stories about helping classmates through difficult times, supporting community members facing challenges, and finding ways to spread joy despite personal struggles, I felt profound gratitude for the authentic legacy Emma had created through her brief but meaningful life. The contrast with Rachel's forgotten baby shower couldn't have been clearer. While my sister had sought temporary attention through manipulation and competition, My daughter had inspired lasting positive change through genuine kindness and authentic courage. The difference between superficial performance and meaningful impact had been definitively demonstrated through the decade following their deaths. The memorial event planning practice had become a model program studied by universities and professional organizations interested in addressing family dynamics during crisis periods. The expertise developed through surviving personal betrayal had contributed to broader understanding of how manipulation tactics emerged during vulnerable moments and how protective strategies could shield grieving families from exploitation. Most importantly, the work provided ongoing connection to Emma's spirit and values while serving families who faced similar challenges. Each successful memorial service where authentic grief was honored and manipulative interference was prevented represented another victory of genuine love over calculated cruelty, another demonstration that character and purpose always prevailed over selfishness and attention-seeking behavior. Rachel's attempt to sabotage Emma's funeral had ultimately created a test that revealed the true nature of every relationship in our extended community while providing the catalyst for transformation that honored our daughter's memory through meaningful service. The sister who'd called my daughter's funeral a minor event had inadvertently demonstrated the profound impact of a child whose brief life continued generating positive change in countless other lives. The choice between attending a baby shower or a child's funeral had revealed everything anyone needed to know about character, priorities, and relationships worth preserving. Those who'd chosen correctly had become the foundation of a community dedicated to transforming grief into purpose and loss into lasting positive impact. Those who'd chosen incorrectly had revealed themselves unworthy of continued investment and access to our authentic selves. Emma's legacy lived on through every family protected from manipulation during memorial planning, every student inspired by her example of courage and kindness, every professional equipped with skills for recognizing and addressing exploitation during vulnerable moments, and every act of service performed in her memory by people who understood that authentic love always triumphed over calculated selfishness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.